Good morning or midday. You're very welcome, all of you out there, to share a few thoughts. Now, this midday, I'd like to approach the question of liturgy from a very unusual angle. It's the question of simplicity versus complication. It's a thorny issue and it's a complex issue, so it'll take a while to unpack it. I have in my hand a certain Joseph Ratzinger, of whom you may actually have heard, and he is somebody who, even way before he was made Supreme Pontiff, was keen on putting things down as he saw them. The only thing was that when he became Pope, he couldn't say things quite so powerfully. In other words, he had to tone things down a bit. But we have the real thought of Ratzinger when he's just a mere cardinal. There he kind of puts things as they are, and sometimes tongue-in-cheek, to make a point. Now, he goes into this issue. So let's listen to what he has to say in his, well, by now, classic Feast of Faith. It was reprinted, of course, after he became Pope, but it was written way early on in the 80s. So it shows how deep and long-lasting his interest is in the whole issue. And by the way, even way into his pontificate, he was still giving this message discreetly that the liturgy is the heart of the life of the Church, and therefore anything which is not correct or deep enough in the liturgy is going to have its consequential effect on the life of the Church itself. So here we have the Holy Father, or rather the Holy Father-to-be, coming out with this question of simplicity. To conclude the observations that he's been making, he goes into this question of basic principles underlying the life of the Church with regard to liturgy. He has been discovering historical issues, and then he goes into current issues. Now, first of all, he makes this point: liturgy is for all. It must be Catholic. Now, you know what that means, of course. Katholos, kath according to the whole on the whole, that is the universe. It's universal. And to get into the mentality that it's the congregation that does its own thing, do it yourself, is very Protestant. In fact, there is an important denomination in Wales. In Welsh it's called Annibynwyr. It means the independents, Congregationalists. They have the point of reference there locally. The congregation does its own thing. Now, it must be Catholic, that is, communicable to all the faithful without distinction of place, origin and education. And by the way, that's actually something which hits one if one is a Catholic compared with something else, going from A to B on this planet. One goes into a different country, maybe for the first time, and one sees the notice board in front of a church building. Does it say Catholic or not? Well, if it does, then one is at home. Now, that is not quite so simple for a Protestant, because there are lots of different forms of Protestantism. And then you've also got the question of the Eastern churches, because they, although they would be in full community with each other, they are actually a bit different insofar as they're very much aware of their local hierarchy. That is, they aren't nationalistic in tendency. They have their own language, and they do go into a church in which they belong, whether it's Greek, whether it's Russian, whether it's Romanian, Bulgarian, whatever it might be. There is the feeling there of belonging to something which actually it's not quite so comfortable for them as it would be for us to go to any Catholic church throughout the world. And they secretly actually would admire that, the fact that we are able to go from A to B just like that and be completely at home in any celebration. The only thing is that, of course, now one doesn't quite understand what is being said, although having said that, one does know what is being prayed, and one can have one's own missal with one, and then one knows exactly what's being prayed, even on a weekly basis. So it's true that as long as one goes into the interior mode, one can surely share not less but more than before, because actually one knows the words themselves in one's own language. Now, therefore, this element of universality, thus it must be, now he uses this word simple, but he puts it in inverted commas. But that is not the same as being cheap. Now that's an important point he's making. Simple does not mean cheap. One is a plus, the other is a minus. Holy simplicity is actually a great boon for the soul. Genuine, noble simplicity is a huge help. Now, I'll go into that because it's a complex issue, even simplicity. But just to be aware that simplex in Greek means bending in the same direction. Sun, together, and the root of plex is bend. So, there is a banal simplism, he says, and there is the simplicity which is the expression of maturity. Now, let's bring that to the human level. Look at a conversation, a human conversation. If the people do not know each other all that well and are not habitually in each other's company, what is going to happen? At all costs, they would exclude even a moment of silence. They will talk. They will talk just to avoid the embarrassment of silence. Nothing much will be said, but they must block out silence. That is a complicated encounter. Compare that with a couple that know each other very well, or a father and a son. Actually, I remember when I was going to school with my father, quite often we'd be in the car from the house to the school and we wouldn't say a word. There was no need to. We were just happy to be together. Now, that is the relaxation of people who don't need to have anything to sustain the sharing of each other's presence. Indeed, when human relationships become really intimate and profound, at that point, to go back to those initial stages of blocking out silence is a sign that they're not actually there, that they're not actually relaxed with each other, and still there's a lack of maturity. So this is the test. Can we be simply quiet, not needing the complication of many words when we're with a dear person? That actually comes also into our adoration and our meditation. How wordy is our adoration and our meditation? If it's made of that same principle of blocking out at all costs a moment of silence, even in adoration and meditation, I mean mental silence in that case, then that same scenario is taking place. When in human affections and bonding, one can really just enjoy maximally the presence of another and want to be just in that quiet company, then one is at home. So too with the Lord in adoration. When one is just happy to be with our best friend, eyeball to eyeball, that holy simplicity is the best. Because then we feel, then we encounter with the heart, then we listen, and He is Lord. Be still and know that I am Lord. And knowing is done with the deepest faculty of awareness. We can't be aware when we're aware of our words. When we're creating words, we're less aware. We're thinking about the words. To engage with the person on the deepest level, one feels the presence of the person. And one feels that presence far more when there is no more necessity for a single word. Just to be with, be with, be with. It is this second true simplicity which applies in the church, says the then simple Joseph Ratzinger. The greatest efforts of the Spirit, the greatest purification, the greatest maturity, all these are needed to produce genuine simplicity. And by the way, a little aside, that does not apply only to intimacy. It applies actually to several levels of human existence. Look at the mature person. He is the one who, in such a way, has a command of a situation that he does not feel the necessity to be full of words. he knows the power of the carefully chosen and well-aimed and perfectly placed word. It is far more listened to than that coming from the geezer. The geezer cannot stop, and no one listens but all switch off. The person who has a few well-chosen words immediately commands attention. Oh, he said something. It spoke. What does it have to say? And all will listen. And also, in some kind of meeting, one notices that the person who has actually most influence is the person who said nothing for the first half hour and then, having perceived everything, concludes all and says, well, what actually is the bit that they've missed, and carries the day. The loudest person is not the strongest person. The mature person has far more force. The requirement of simplicity, says Ratzinger, properly speaking, is identical with the requirement of purity and maturity. Certainly, there are many stages on the way to it, but each one makes demands on the soul, without which nothing is achieved. Now, this question of absence of complication impinges on every sector, actually, of human life, including liturgy, including adoration meditation. If a person is addicted to having words coming in all the time and images, that person actually is spiritually in trouble. Now, actually, what's going on there is the Angelus. I'm just going to put it off because it didn't get put off at the 12 o'clock, so I should bring it off now. That's my way in the Hermitage of calling me to prayer. The alarm goes, so that's just a little parenthesis. Now, the way in which the person who is free from that kind of addiction will go through free time without going immediately into opening something which cancels simplicity. The soul which needs, as soon as he's alone, to switch in to a screen or whatever it might be, that person cannot taste the sacred sound of silence in which the voice of the beloved, with a big B, is to be found. Now, it is true, it is supremely true in our day, that the voice of the beloved uses human voices to get his truth, the truth of the Logos, to us. But how many of us actually invoke the Holy Spirit before switching on? That is the problem. We take on what's out there. We go from one to the other. We don't let the Holy Spirit command. These are moments of potential growth when we're plugged into something which is emitting truth or absence thereof. But the point is that we're, in any case, in some way becoming dependent on outside sources. We are no longer at that point self-sufficient. We cannot let the Lord be the direct, simple interior master. We are depending on the secondary causes. Now, it's kind of important to realize what we're at, because this absence of capacity to face simplicity in our day is going to impact on all the rest, including our liturgy. We'll have the same holy fidget at the altar as we have elsewhere, because one sector has an impact on the other. So let's get this straight. It's kind of important to realize that we are damaged, psychologically damaged, by the fact that we're always, all day, exposed to what? Absence of simplicity. We're exposed to multiplicity. Words, many words coming at us. Words, 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 and then more words again. So that's what we're at. So just be careful as you go through this day where you're giving your ear. Is it to other people's words or to that of the Word? The big word, the Logos, who is simple. John of the Cross put it this way: the Eternal Father only pronounced one word. It was the Logos. Now, certainly there are many stages on the way to it, but each one makes demands on the soul without which nothing is achieved. So his second point is this: Catholicity does not mean uniformity. If one goes to a place like Taizé, there are interesting things going on there, been going on there already since the post-war years. It's interesting how from there has come a plethora of simplicity, of holy simplicity with regard to the repertoire of repetitive and very beautiful and uplifting chant. It has this in common, that it is deliberately simple. That is, one does not need a book once one has memorized and is able to repeat, and therefore one has one's eyes closed. Therefore it's creating a sacred atmosphere without distraction of having to fill around with books. It's just memory, and that sustains a holy atmosphere which enables the soul then to be free in the simplicity of repetition. It's something which actually we have in the Rosary in a different form, the simplicity of repetition, which sustains prayer. Because if one goes actually to, for instance, a charismatic prayer group, there can be elements of that there, if it's a good one, but there is the danger that it can be complex, that there have to be new words coming in all the time. Now, see, we can't take in too much at one go. So the element of being able to create a simple atmosphere is a great blessing for the soul. A good prayer group is in that mode of receptivity in which the words are not the centre of their own attention. We can be just free within the words to engage with the word. So, Vatican II, says Ratzinger, had a purpose in making special mention of the cathedral church in its constitution on the liturgy. Now here we're going into complication, but holy complication, and he's going to make a point. It's not either or, but both and. Now he's got a very profound point coming at the end of this discourse. Let's not miss it. The cathedral can and should be more ambitious than the normal parish church in terms of the solemnity and beauty of the worship of God. Now remember how Augustine, the young Augustine, when he wasn't yet baptized, came into the cathedral at Milan by chance, where St. Ambrose was presiding, and he was knocked between the eyes by holy beauty. It was the chant of the Psalms, beautifully executed, which made him cry, and through the emotions the Holy Spirit came in. The Lord was using his emotions to work on his will. But it was through the immediate secondary cause of human execution of beauty. And beauty is the language of precisely the Trinity on earth. We need, therefore, to create beauty so as to encounter that presence of the Blessed Trinity. It's the most unutterable and yet communicable, in the same way that we address each other with a way which is pleasing. For instance, on Valentine's Day, we create all kinds of beauty. So too with our God, we go to the effort of creating an atmosphere worthy of the highest beauty. Nothing shoddy is good enough for the highest beauty. And here too, art, says Ratzinger, will be involved at different levels depending on the occasion and the prevailing conditions. Together, we make up the whole. That's kind of important now, because what's crept in is that in the interests of involving the youth, more than half the assembly is not involved, quite often in our parish assemblies. I mean, with regard to the execution of music. It's the modern specialization of the folk group. So, well, we've got the young people, a few of them anyway, involved big time. But the rest, where are they with regard to engagement? Now, together we make up the whole. We do not all have to be doing everything. Now, you see, what is coming up here is the whole point that there is also a place for specialization. The Church, being Catholic, is hugely rich. It is strange that the post-conciliar pluralism has created uniformity in one respect at least. It will not tolerate a high standard of expression. Now, this is Ratzinger at his best, tongue-in-cheek. He's making a point we should never make as a pope, but he's free to make it as a simple cardinal, or whatever he was in the 80s. He's saying things as he sees them. We need to counter this by reinstating the whole range of possibilities within the unity of the Catholic liturgy. There was a joke which naughtily used to go round when something was slow in moving in the Vatican. They would say amongst themselves, the Pope is playing the piano. Now, you see, that's actually interesting, because they loved Pope Ratzinger, because actually he had time for creating gratuitous beauty. You'd hear him playing the piano even as Pope. and he had time, and people knew it actually. They would put on, in honour of the Pope, a beautiful moment of beauty. And he would make time as Pope to sit down to listen to the language of beauty, which was music. He loved a well-executed high point of orchestra and beauty from the repertoire of antiquity and modern music. And he would also conclude by a little speech which would go into the Osservatore Romano on some aspect of beauty. He knew how to pull out of it the best. But it was giving to God his space as the author of all beauty, because we're not exposed to that very often, if we're honest about it, in our culture today. You go to any place on earth in the West and you're obliged to listen to pumped music which is not anything resembling music. It's ugliness incarnate. And if you do any kind of analysis of the lyrics, you'll be horrified at what is not being said. Now, we need to counter this by inserting the whole range of possibilities within the unity of the Catholic liturgy. Now, a third point he's making is this. One of the principles of the Council's liturgical reform was, with good reason, the participatio actuosa. And by the way, we've gone into that issue before. Actuosa is deliberately used because the word activa does exist in Latin, but they chose actuosa. It means not just active, but it actually means actual. It's engaged. It means on level of the soul, that one is engaging in what's going on. Because remember now, way back, people in Ireland would have known the time when the rosary was said, either in private or actually in public, during the Mass itself. It's a strange kettle of fish, but that's what going to Mass often meant, you see. That's what they were getting away from. But it does not mean that one is actually all the time doing and saying something right throughout the celebration, but it means that one is actually taking part, mentally and with one's heart, in what's going on. It is praying liturgy. Now, so, one of the principles, therefore, of the reform was this active, well, I'm translating now as they do nowadays, participation, the active participation of the whole people of God in the liturgy. Subsequently, however, this idea has been fatally narrowed down, giving the impression that active participation is only present where there is evidence of external activity. Speaking, singing, preaching, liturgical action. This morning I had the parish mass because the parish priest is away, and even though there are quite a few people in church, actually I did, as I always do on a weekday, explain that I prefer to distribute what is being consecrated at the altar, and therefore I don't need any help to do that, do it all on my own. And it is actually very peaceful because the Holy Communion is slightly longer, but it's very quiet. People have time to receive their God and to ingest the grace and ruminate. Why are we in such a hurry to get this over and done with? But that's true participation because the soul is participating and there's a peace and a hush in the air. Let's calm down our celebrations. There's enough of the McDonald's rite out there already, and the demon loves it. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Do you know that in some restaurants they deliberately have hard, uncomfortable chairs to keep them turning over, turning over, turning over. And the music in McDonald's is high speed, so they eat quickly and give place to the next person. Next please, next please. Why are we in a hurry also in a church? The McDonald's rite has come into our celebrations big time. So, subsequently, however, this idea has been fatally narrowed down, giving the impression that active participation is only present when there is evidence of external activity. It may be that Articles 28 and 30 of the Constitution of the Liturgy, which define active participation, have encouraged this narrow view by speaking largely of external activities. Yet, Article 30 also speaks of silence as a mode of active participation. You tell that to somebody who is plugging the McDonald's rite and he'll be horrified. Silence is the last thing you want in church, before, during or after. We must go on to say that listening, and listen, this is kind of important, that listening, the receptive employment of the senses, now that's powerful, the receptive employment of the senses, Three powerful words. I'll say them again. The receptive employment of the senses and the mind. Now you see, the mind is what filters what comes from the senses. Spiritual participation, he says, are surely just as much activity, in inverted commas, as speaking is. This morning, actually, there was a genuine feeling in the air that people were participating. It was quiet, although I was saying quite a bit, actually, of the liturgy even on a weekday, but it was gentle, and people actually were engaging. A priest knows, they can feel in the air when people are engaging, and this element of calm helps an awful lot. For instance, there's no need to be using vocally now, all these formula, because it is permissible to say the prayers of the offertory aloud. But actually the norm, believe it or not, is not. It's a permission given, because traditionally they were said in silence, and that is still there if one looks carefully at the instructions, but it is allowed to say them out loud. But I never do. In fact, we weren't allowed to in our monastery. It was just not even thought of. Always said from memory, and therefore it gives a calm to the whole offertory sequence and movement. There are some priests who say everything out loud, even what is not supposed at all be meant to be said out loud. An unstoppable flow of words. Our receptivity, perception, being moved, that's your Ratzinger at his best, being moved, not active things too, he says, putting active in inverted commas. What we have here, surely, is a diminished view of man, which reduces him to what is verbally intelligible. Verbally intelligible. And this at a time when we are aware that what comes to the surface in rationality is only the tip of the iceberg compared with the totality of man. Now here we have the anthropology of Ratzinger. The totality of man. We're not just voice box. In more concrete terms, there are a good number of people who can, this is actually powerful, there are a good number of people who can sing better with the heart, he puts in inverted commas, than, and here again in inverted commas, than with the mouth. See what he's saying here? You can sing with the heart better than with the mouth. Now he's coming to a point here. But their hearts are really stimulated to sing, their hearts are now, through the singing of those who have, that's put in italics, who have the gift of singing with their mouths. It is as if they themselves actually sing in the others. Their thankful listening is united with the voices of the singers in the one worship of God. Now, do you see what he's saying here? It's actually very profound. It's Ratzinger at his best. Are we to compel people to sing when they cannot? He says again with tongue-in-cheek. And by doing so, silence not only their hearts, but the hearts of others too. Now that's Ratzinger at his naughtiest. This is not to impugn the singing of the whole faithful people, which has its inalienable place in the church, but it is opposed to a one-sidedness which is founded neither on tradition nor on the nature of the case. I happened to come across last week, and I shared it with you, this naughty YouTube comparing extreme Americanized Western liturgy with the solemn, calm, patriarchal liturgy in Moscow. And the people in the cathedral in Moscow, even the children, were in flight mode while this polyphonic choir was in angelic mode, elevating them all. But their participation was completely on the level of the heart, and making signs of the cross, kissing icons and whatever. But they were in prayer, engaged. In the one in Los Angeles, with all these bishops present, there was an awful lot of engagement with the body, movement, clapping, dancing, playing of loud instruments, and all that can be imagined. was the heart of the assembly in that same engagement with regard to interiority and communion of soul with the one they were honouring? That I don't know, only God knows. But given the extremely externalised notion of participation, the question does pose itself. Do we equate participation with the maximum of the spectacular? Because if we do, we've got another thing coming. I'll just pause there just to get indigestion, so I'll come back in a few minutes. So we carry on where we left off. We have this fourth point where he goes into the question of utility. Now, my parents grew up in the generation of the war, and after the war there was a lot of furniture around which was referred to as utility. People just had to survive. When they were setting up a new house, they got things which were just functional. But that actually now has entered into, if we're not careful, our liturgy and even our church furniture. Functional liturgy. It's valid and that's it. And the same regarding furniture. When we compare the care that our ancestors gave into creating a house of God and the time that went into it with what we do, it's quite outlandish. Now and again I am called to celebrate in a tiny church in the country, and Father John Hogan, whom you may know because he's on Liturgy, quite often he is the parish priest of that area. He has 3 churches, 2 old ones and 1 new one. The new one is like a Sputnik, and it's the only one that causes problems because nothing works. I mean, it's always leaking or whatever, whereas the other ones, they're perfectly happy to stand still and not do any harm to anyone in the last 100 or 200 years. These new things last a generation, that's it. So that's the care that we put into things now compared to what they did years ago. And when one compares our cathedrals with some of the things that we put up now in a short time, one wonders, well, why are we getting away with things which actually are of the order of the joining of earth to heaven? Because a church is a place which is extraterritorial. It doesn't belong to our geography. It's claimed by heaven, and therefore it has to be a part of heaven, and all in there has to be in some way an echo and a reflection of it. And by the way, as nowadays in our hymn books, people are not at all shy to change the word of the author because it has to be inclusive, so too they're not shy to interfere with the vision of the architect. And I don't just mean with regard to putting an altar in a new place, because I've noticed that many of our churches, even before the council, were messed up because they were built to have the altar at the right place. And quite a few of our churches have put an altar halfway down with the apse made into a sacristy. That was never meant to happen. It just doesn't work. So one has to be aware that the architect knows what he's doing, and one has to follow the intuition of the architect. The vision, the eyes fall on a certain point, and that's where they should fall. And one has to be aware of these things. An amateur should not be messing around with churches. It's a specialized job. Anyway, that's parenthesis, but it's part of the same problem, utility. One doesn't want a box for God. A church which only makes use of utility, music, in inverted commas, has fallen for what is, in fact, useless. That's clever. That's Ratzinger. She, too, becomes ineffectual. The church now. For her mission is a far higher one. As the Old Testament speaks of the temple, the church is to be the place of glory, chavov. Chavov in Hebrew literally means weight, weight. And as such, too, the place where mankind's cry of distress is brought to the ear of God. The church must not settle down with what is merely comfortable and serviceable at the parish level. She must arouse the voice of the cosmos. That's Ratzinger. The voice of the cosmos. And by glorifying the Creator, elicit the glory of the cosmos itself, making it also glorious, beautiful, habitable, and beloved. Now, that's Ratzinger going to town. I just want to make a little parenthesis. It's what I mentioned with regard to the not either or mentality, but the both and one, which is where Ratzinger is going to land. In our life too, if we only have one mode, we're poor, unbalanced creatures. There's a polarity in our being, and to be complete we need to contact both ends. We need to be interiorized and exteriorized at times, and to know the richness of the two blendings of silence and solitude with exchange with each other. A person who cannot be alone and cannot be simple is a poor, inadequate person, not yet mature and not self-sufficient. He's depending on others all the time. Now, I just want to share something with you which it hit me when I was in retreat shortly before ordination. It was, as I spent a lot of time there, quietly in adoration and meditation, in that retreat, in the monastic setting, the awareness that was coming to me big time about the poverty of my soul, who couldn't at times switch off and just enjoy the sound of silence inhabited, where God was waiting for me in the simplicity of one word alone, jumping out of the page or coming into the heart. I was blotting out God. I was too much doing things and creating things and anything but not being with from morning until night. Now, the liturgy also could have that if one wasn't careful. I remember actually making this comment tongue-in-cheek one time in community. To be valid, liturgy must be complicated. That was a reaction. However, now, I was a bit naughty to say that, but what I was getting was this, that it's not always better to have things hugely complicated because it takes away the distraction with regard to the interiority. It has to be automatic if it's to be, as it were, allowing the soul to take flight. If it's thinking about what's going to happen next and getting to the right page at the right time, then one is actually sometimes taken away from contact. It's a movement in which one gets lost, and therefore automatic pilot after a while does enter into it to allow us to have freedom. Now, I wrote this not out of mischief but out of repentance, because I was seeing where my life was going. There were too many things taking place. And I was remembering actually what was said by a Carthusian, of all people, at the end of his life. J'ai gaspillé ma vie à faire trop de choses. I wasted my life doing too many things. So, I wrote this. Now listen, and listen to what's not being said, because it's more important than what's being said. The title is just Simplify. Okay? Simplify. Simplify. Lines written in retreat shortly before ordination. I have a secret heard within this place, beside this little lamp that wards my king. I have gazed long at this, the well-hid face, and sometimes in the dark I would thee sing, for thou art near, my God, and nearer still, as ours thy mighty hand move toward my head, and in a calmed corner much can fill the empty ear that hears what is not said. 'Tis this, my silent Lord, that thou didst say, deep, deep, where all is known. 'Twas this, thy word, that coming drove full oft a word its way into the long unsaid. I heard, but one small shade of meaning in the dark. Enough enough, enough 'tis hence to hark. In other words, there's a whole art in being simple, and it's made of abdicating and receiving. Listening is made of receiving, and it applies both to our prayer and to our interchange with each other. The same mode enters into the equation on both sides. A good adorer is a good friend because he's used to receiving, and we receive the mystery of another soul. When we come out of being on the receiving end in adoration and not the bombing end, then we come into that mode too with a human being who comes to the door with his burden. We receive. And by the way, the ministry of listening is very important. One can tell straight away a person who knows how to listen, because many a person is too helpful by thinking that he's copped on straight away to all the problem. And so what does he do? He interrupts and gives the answer, which has nothing to do with the problem, because the problem has not yet been got to. The problem is perhaps at the end of the discourse. And if we interrupt at the preamble, we won't get to the end of the discourse. And so we've missed the point, and we've blocked out the reception with our own wonderful solution, which has nothing to do with the problem. So it's a problem. We have to know how to receive. In German, there's an advantage in that people can't interrupt because the verb comes at the end and the oomph comes at the end. We are used to thinking what the person is going to say, like anticipated script. We think we know what he's going to say, and so we attack. And in fact, we're already calculating in our mind what to say. That already is blocking out listening. We're listening to our own thought pattern at that point. Listening is a whole art, and it's made of simplicity, in which we no longer churn out words mentally while listening. We're actually listening and giving space to the words coming into us. And it's the same with the Lord. In quiet times before the Lord, one word can go a long way. One asks for a word, one opens the scriptures, and one reads not chapters and chapters, but a few words until warmed. And then one has the launching part, and one goes off from that launching pad into communion. The point is communion, not intellectual knowledge. They're two separate issues. Lectio Divina is not intellectual learning. That's a different ministry. Lectio Divina and spiritual reading are also slightly different. Spiritual reading, one reads a bit more, and one gets into the thought of the writer. But Lectio is contemplative. It's heart reading. It's engagement reading. It's divine reading. Remember how the fathers taught the scala, the scale, the school, the ladder. It's Lectio, it's meditatio, meditation, it's oratio, going into prayer mode, and then it's contemplatio, it's heart-warmed engagement, and that must go on. And a few words will carry us through the day. That mode, then, contemplative mode, must carry on. It's nourished in a simple mode of a few words carrying us a long way. And by the way, if one is in contemplative mode, one doesn't cease to be in contemplative mode, whatever one is doing. Therefore, engaging with another person, one is still in contemplative mode. It's just that we're listening to the Lord through that person at that point. We're not a different compartment at all. And when it comes to manual work, we're still in that mode of engagement. And by the way, that is the secret that we need all to have. As long as we're inhabited by the Divine Trinity, the Blessed Trinity, by being in a state of grace, there's no point in which we're not tabernacles of the Most High, so all we have to do is engage with that presence. Therefore, we all have access to the contemplative life. All that we're doing, as the monastic life, if it's protected by a certain simplicity of absence of just superfluous words, we have access to the simple regard of contact. Adoration is going towards contact, and contact is, as I said at the beginning, simple. So let's not mess up our lives, both on the vertical and the horizontal, with too much. A few well-perceived, well-aimed words sent and received are far more important than a day filled with empty, unheard, dull words. Words are like leaves, and where they most abound, much depth of sense beneath is seldom to be found. We meet again next week.